Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to explore two ideas that sound like they're straight out of science fiction: technocracy and transhumanism.
You got that right.
Yeah, we've got a mountain of research here. Books, articles, historical documents.
Oh, yeah.
And it all kind of points toward a future where society is run by data and algorithms. And humans themselves are being upgraded with technology.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that these aren't just fringe theories floating around in the dark corners of the internet,
Right.
These are movements with a history and a structure and a surprising amount of influence in the world today.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is technocracy? Paint a picture for us.
Okay.
What would a technocratic society look like?
Okay, imagine a world where decisions, big and small, are made not by politicians or elected officials, but by scientists and engineers. And the goal: maximum efficiency and productivity in every aspect of society, from resource allocation to energy consumption. It's like applying the principles of engineering to the very fabric of human life.
So it's a world run by data and algorithms where human judgment and intuition take a backseat.
Exactly. Technocrats see traditional political processes as messy, inefficient, and prone to corruption. They believe that a scientifically managed society guided by data and objective analysis would be far superior.
But who are these technocrats, and where did this idea even come from? It sounds pretty radical to me.
Well, the roots of technocracy go back to the 1930s during the Great Depression.
Oh, wow.
There was this sense that traditional political and economic systems had failed.
Right.
And a group of scientists and engineers in the United States, they came together to propose this new way forward.
Yep.
They formed this movement called Technocracy, Inc., and their most influential work was something called the Technocracy Study Course.
Okay, tell me more about this study course. I've heard it's a pretty intense read.
It is. The study course lays out the core principles of technocracy, including its rather stark vision of a scientifically managed society. It outlines 7 specific requirements for a functioning technocratic system, and some of them are pretty eye-opening.
Like what? Give us the juicy details.
Well, for example, the study course calls for the continuous 24-hour-per-day monitoring of all energy production and consumption.
Wow.
It advocates for a system of universal registration where all goods and services are tracked and accounted for. And perhaps most controversially, it proposes tracking individual consumption patterns to ensure equitable distribution of resources.
Okay, wow. It's starting to sound a bit Orwellian. Is this just a historical curiosity, or are these ideas still relevant today?
That's where things get really interesting. While Technocracy, Inc. may have faded from the spotlight, its core ideas have persisted and even gained traction in certain circles.
Okay.
In fact, there are these intriguing connections between this historical movement and some very powerful figures in the world today.
We're like who? Spill the tea.
Well, consider Elon Musk. Yeah.
CEO of Tesla and SpaceX.
Right.
It turns out his grandfather, Dr. Joshua Haldeman, was a prominent leader of Technocracy, Inc. in Canada.
No way. That's a pretty wild connection.
Yeah.
So these ideas have been passed down through generations.
It seems so, and it raises some intriguing questions about the influence of these seemingly fringe ideas on some of the most powerful people in the world.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these historical roots connect to the present.
Yeah.
But how are these technocratic ideas actually manifesting in the world today? What are we seeing?
Well, one area where we see technocratic principles at play is in the development of smart grid technology. This involves using digital technology to manage the flow of electricity across vast networks. On the surface, it sounds like a good thing. You get greater efficiency, less waste.
Right. Who doesn't love efficiency? But what's the catch?
The catch is that smart grid technology creates the potential for centralized control over energy distribution.
In a technocratic system, this control could be used to allocate energy resources based on predetermined criteria, potentially bypassing traditional market mechanisms and democratic processes.
So instead of the free market, determining energy prices and allocation, it would be up to the technocrats and their algorithms to decide who gets what.
Exactly. And it's not just about electricity. The same principles can be applied to other essential resources like water, food, and even transportation.
So potentially a small group of unelected experts could control the very basics of life for an entire population. That's a bit unsettling.
It is. And it's important to remember that these technological systems, while often presented as neutral and objective, can be used in ways that concentrate power and limit individual choice.
Okay, that's smart grid. What about smart cities? I've heard that term thrown around a lot lately.
Yeah.
How does that fit into the technocratic vision?
Smart cities are basically urban environments that are saturated with sensors and data collection systems. The goal is to optimize everything from traffic flow to waste management to public safety. Again, on the surface, it sounds great. Who doesn't want a cleaner, more efficient city?
Right, but I sense a but coming.
The but is that smart cities raise serious concerns about surveillance and the erosion of privacy. In a smart city, your movements, your activities, even your consumption habits can be tracked and analyzed in real time.
It's like living in a giant panopticon.
Exactly. And this data can be used not only to improve services, but also to control and manipulate behavior.
Right.
Imagine a world where your access to certain areas of a city or even certain goods and services is determined by your social credit score, your carbon footprint, or some other metric determined by the technocrats.
It's like a real-life episode of Black Mirror.
And it's not as far-fetched as it might seem. In China, for example, they're already experimenting with social credit systems that track citizens' behavior and assign them scores based on their compliance with government directives.
So we're already seeing elements of this technocratic vision being implemented in the real world.
Yes, and it's not just in China. Similar trends are emerging in other parts of the world, often under the guise of sustainability, efficiency, or public safety.
Okay, I think we've laid out a pretty clear picture of technocracy and its potential implications.
Yeah.
But before we move on, there's one more concept I want to touch on, and that's carbon currency. How does that fit into this whole technocratic framework?
Carbon currency is an intriguing idea that aligns perfectly with the technocratic vision of resource allocation and control. The basic premise is that individuals would be allocated a certain amount of energy credits, perhaps linked to their carbon footprint.
So like a digital ration system for energy.
Exactly. And these credits would expire periodically, preventing wealth accumulation and ensuring that everyone stays within their allotted energy budget.
It's like a way to enforce limits on consumption and control individual behavior.
Precisely. And in a world where resources are becoming increasingly scarce, the idea of carbon currency is gaining traction among those who believe that traditional market mechanisms are inadequate to address the challenges of climate change and sustainability.
Wow, this is all pretty mind-blowing stuff. It's starting to feel like we're living in a science fiction novel. But before we get too carried away with the dystopian possibilities, let's shift gears and explore the other side of this equation. Transhumanism.
Yes. Transhumanism is a fascinating and often controversial movement that's intricately linked to the rise of technology and its potential to transform the very nature of what it means to be human.
Okay, I'm all ears. Take us down the transhumanist rabbit hole.
Let's start with the basics. Transhumanism is essentially a philosophy that embraces the use of technology to enhance human capabilities and transcend the limitations of our biology.
So we're talking about things like genetic engineering, brain-computer interfaces, and even the possibility of uploading our consciousness into machines.
Exactly. Transhumanists believe that these technologies have the potential to eradicate disease, extend lifespan, enhance our cognitive abilities, and ultimately merge human consciousness with artificial intelligence.
Wow, it's like taking evolution into our own hands.
That's a great way to put it. Transhumanists see the human body and mind as works in progress, something that can be constantly improved and upgraded with technology. They believe that we're on the cusp of a new era of human evolution, driven by technology rather than natural selection.
Okay. I can see how this idea would appeal to some people, especially those who are passionate about technology and its potential to solve problems. But I imagine there are also a lot of ethical concerns about messing with human nature in this way.
Absolutely. Transhumanism raises a whole host of profound ethical and philosophical questions. For example, what happens to the concept of human dignity when we start manipulating our biology and blowing the lines between human and machine?
Right. Where do we draw the line? And what are the potential unintended consequences of these, like, radical interventions? It's a lot to think about.
It is. And it's crucial that we engage in these conversations now before these technologies become so advanced that we lose control of their development and deployment.
Okay, so we've got technocracy on one side, promoting a scientifically managed society controlled by data and algorithms.
Right.
And transhumanism on the other, like pushing the boundaries of human enhancement with technology.
And what's really interesting is how these two seemingly disparate movements are starting to converge in certain areas.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, think about it. Both technocracy and transhumanism share a belief in the power of science and technology to solve problems and improve the human condition.
They both have a kind of utopian vision of the future, where technology has eradicated suffering and created a more perfect world.
Exactly. And in some ways, they complement each other. Technocracy provides the framework for a scientifically managed society, while transhumanism offers the tools to enhance the human beings who inhabit that society.
So it's like a two-pronged approach to creating a better future. Optimize the system and upgrade the individuals within it.
Precisely. And this convergence is becoming increasingly evident in the agendas of certain powerful organizations and institutions.
Okay. You've piqued my curiosity. Who are these organizations? And what are their agendas?
That's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll uncover how technocracy and transhumanism are influencing the world today, often operating behind the scenes and shaping policies and technologies that will impact all of our lives.
This is getting really interesting. I can't wait to delve deeper into this rabbit hole with you. But before we move on, I just want to remind our listeners to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next part of this incredible deep dive. We'll be back soon with even more mind-blowing insights and revelations.
See you in part 2.
All right. Welcome back to our deep dive into technocracy and transhumanism. In part 1, we explored the historical roots of these movements and how their ideas are starting to, take shape in the world today.
Yeah, we saw how technology like smart grid and smart cities, while offering potential benefits, could also be used to concentrate power and control in the hands of a select few.
And we touched on the rise of carbon currency as a potential tool for, regulating energy consumption and even individual behavior.
Right. Now, in part 2, we're going to shine a light on some of the powerful organizations and institutions that are actively promoting these technocratic and transhumanist agendas.
Okay, let's name names. Who are these shadowy figures pulling the strings behind the scenes?
Well, one organization that stands out is the World Economic Forum, or WEF.
Okay.
They're a global, non-governmental organization that brings together some of the world's most influential leaders from business, government, and academia.
I've heard of them. They're the folks who host those fancy annual meetings in Davos, Switzerland, where the global elite jet in to discuss the future of the world.
Exactly. And what's interesting is how openly they've been promoting both technocratic and transhumanist ideas in recent years.
Okay, give us some examples. What are they saying that aligns with these movements?
Well, one of their most widely discussed initiatives is the Great Reset.
Okay.
It's basically a call for a fundamental restructuring of the global economy and society in response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
I remember reading about that. It sounded pretty radical.
It is. The WEF argues that the pandemic exposed the flaws in our current systems and that we need to build back better with a more sustainable, equitable, and technologically advanced world.
Okay, that sounds admirable on the surface, but what does it actually mean in practice?
Well, one of the WEF's key slogans for the Great Reset is, you will own nothing and be happy.
Whoa, hold on a second. You will own nothing and be happy. That sounds a bit creepy, like something out of a dystopian novel.
It does, doesn't it? And it aligns perfectly with the technocratic vision of abolishing private property and centralizing control over resources.
So instead of owning our homes, our cars, and our possessions, we'll be renting everything from some kind of global entity controlled by the WEF.
That's the basic idea. The WEF argues that this will lead to a more sustainable and equitable society where resources are shared more efficiently.
But what about individual freedom and autonomy? Doesn't owning things give us a sense of independence and security?
That's a valid concern. And critics of the Great Reset argue that it's ultimately about concentrating power in the hands of unelected global elites and eroding individual liberties.
Okay, so we've got the WEF promoting this vision of a world where we own nothing and supposedly live happily ever after. What other technocratic and transhumanist ideas are they pushing?
Well, another key framework for advancing their agenda is sustainable development.
Okay.
It's often presented as a way to balance economic growth with environmental protection and social equity.
That sounds like a noble goal. What's the problem?
The problem is that sustainable development initiatives often involve increased government control and regulation of individual behavior, aligning with the technocratic desire for centralized management of society.
So it's not just about protecting the environment and promoting social justice, it's also about controlling people's lives.
That's the concern. And it's interesting to note that the origins of sustainable development can be traced back to the United Nations Agenda 21.
Oh, okay.
A comprehensive plan for global governance and resource management that was adopted in 1992.
Agenda 21, that sounds familiar. I vaguely remember hearing about it years ago, but it seemed pretty obscure at the time.
It did. But Agenda 21 has actually been very influential in shaping global policy in areas like climate change, biodiversity, and urban development.
So is Agenda 21 basically like the blueprint for the Great Reset?
Some people argue that it is. They see the Great Reset as the culmination of decades of planning and policy making that has been steadily moving us towards a more globalized and technocratic world.
Okay, so we've got the WEF, the Great Reset, Sustainable Development, and Agenda 21, all interconnected and like pushing us in a particular direction. What about transhumanism? Where does that fit into the picture?
Well, transhumanism is very much embedded in the WEF's agenda, particularly in their focus on the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
The Fourth Industrial Revolution. Starting to feel like I need a glossary to keep up with all these terms.
It can be overwhelming, but it's important to understand how these different concepts are connected. The Fourth Industrial Revolution, as defined by the WEF, is characterized by the fusion of technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics, biotechnology, and nanotechnology.
So it's basically a technological tsunami that's about to transform every aspect of our lives.
Exactly. And the WEF sees this technological revolution as an opportunity to address global challenges like climate change, poverty, and disease. But they also acknowledge the potential risks, particularly the ethical implications of enhancing human capabilities and merging with machines.
Okay, so they're aware of the potential downsides of transhumanism. That's reassuring, I guess. But are they actually doing anything to, like, mitigate those risks?
Well, that's debatable. The WEF has published reports and hosted discussions on the ethics of artificial intelligence and gene editing, but critics argue that they're not doing enough to ensure that these technologies are developed and deployed responsibly.
It's one thing to talk about ethics, but it's another thing to actually implement safeguards and regulations that, like, protect individual rights and prevent potential abuses.
Exactly, and that's where the rubber meets the road.
Okay, so we've established that the WEF is a major player in promoting both technocratic and transhumanist ideas. Are there any other organizations or institutions we should be aware of?
Well, another influential player in the transhumanist space is Singularity University.
Okay.
It's an educational institution and think tank that was co-founded by futurist Ray Kurzweil and entrepreneur Peter Diamandis.
I've heard of Ray Kurzweil. He's the guy who predicts that we'll achieve immortality within a few decades, right?
Yeah. Yes, he's one of the most prominent proponents of the singularity, a hypothetical point in time when artificial intelligence surpasses human intelligence, leading to an explosion of technological progress and unpredictable changes to human civilization.
Okay, so Singularity University is basically a training ground for the transhumanist elite.
In a way, yes. They offer educational programs and workshops that explore the potential of exponential technologies to solve global challenges and transform the human condition.
It sounds like a pretty exclusive club.
It is. Their programs are typically attended by entrepreneurs, investors, and policymakers who are interested in shaping the future of technology and society.
Okay, so we've got the WEF and Singularity University as, like, key players in this technocratic and transhumanist movement. But it all seems a bit abstract and theoretical. How are these ideas actually being implemented in the real world?
Well, one concrete example is the rise of surveillance capitalism.
Surveillance capitalism, that sounds ominous.
It is. Surveillance capitalism is a term coined by scholar Shoshana Zuboff to describe the business model of companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon.
So we're talking about the tech giants that collect vast amounts of data on our online activity and use it to target us with ads and manipulate our behavior.
Exactly. And what's interesting is how this data collection and analysis aligns perfectly with the technocratic goal of monitoring and controlling populations.
So these tech companies are basically the foot soldiers of the technocracy.
In a sense, yes. They're providing the tools and the data that make it possible to monitor and manage society in unprecedented ways.
And it's not just happening online. We're also seeing the expansion of government surveillance programs with cameras, facial recognition technology, and other tracking systems being deployed in public spaces around the world.
Right. And the justification for this surveillance is often framed in terms of public safety and security.
But it raises serious concerns about the erosion of privacy and the potential for abuse.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that these surveillance technologies are often developed and deployed without adequate public debate or democratic oversight.
So it's like we're sleepwalking into a surveillance state where our every move is tracked and analyzed by algorithms.
That's the concern. And what's even more unsettling is the potential for these surveillance technologies to be integrated with other emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and predictive analytics.
So instead of just monitoring our past behavior, they could start, like, predicting our future actions.
Exactly. And this could have profound implications for how we live our lives, from the jobs we're offered to the loans we're approved for to the partners we're matched with.
It's like a real-life version of the movie Minority Report, where people are arrested for crimes they haven't even committed yet.
And it's not as far-fetched as it might seem. In China, for example, they're already using AI-powered surveillance systems to predict and preempt potential crimes and social unrest.
This is all pretty disturbing stuff. It's starting to feel like we're on a slippery slope towards a dystopian future where individual freedom and autonomy are sacrificed in the name of efficiency, security, and technological progress.
It's a valid concern, and that's precisely why it's so important to be aware of these trends and to engage in critical thinking about the technologies and policies that are shaping our world.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the WEF, the Great Reset, Sustainable Development, Agenda 21, Singularity University, surveillance capitalism, and even Minority Report. I'm starting to feel like my head is spinning.
It's a lot to take in, but it's crucial that we understand how these different pieces of the puzzle fit together.
Right. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore the specific tactics being used to advance these agendas and what we can do to resist these trends and preserve our freedom and autonomy in a world that's increasingly shaped by technology. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into technocracy and transhumanism. In the previous parts, we explored the history of these movements, their core ideas, and how they're being promoted by powerful organizations like the WEF.
We also took a hard look at the potential downsides of these trends, particularly the erosion of privacy, the concentration of power, and the ethical dilemmas of enhancing human capabilities with technology.
Right. Now, in this final part, we're going to shift our focus to the tactics being used to advance these agendas and what we can do to resist these trends and preserve our freedom and autonomy in an increasingly, technocratic world.
Yeah, because it's not enough to simply be aware of these movements, right? We also need to understand how they operate, how they gain influence, and how they shape our perceptions and behaviors.
Okay, so let's talk tactics. What are some of the strategies being used to nudge us toward a technocratic and transhumanist future?
Well, one of the most effective tactics is the manipulation of language and narratives. You see, to gain widespread acceptance for radical ideas, you need to repackage them in a way that seems appealing and beneficial.
It's all about framing,
Yeah.
right? Make it sound like it's for our own good, even if it ultimately erodes our freedom and autonomy.
Exactly. And one of the most effective ways to do this is to focus on fear. If you can convince people that they're facing a catastrophic threat, they'll be more willing to accept drastic solutions, even if those solutions involve giving up their rights.
We saw this play out perfectly during the COVID-19 pandemic. People were so terrified of the virus that they were willing to accept lockdowns, mask mandates, and even experimental vaccines without, questioning the potential risks or long-term consequences.
It was a textbook example of how fear can be used to manipulate public opinion and behavior, and the same tactic is being used to promote the climate change agenda. We're constantly bombarded with apocalyptic predictions about rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and mass extinction.
And the solution, according to these narratives, is to embrace sustainable development and, drastically reduce our carbon footprint, even if it means sacrificing our economic prosperity and personal freedoms.
Precisely. It's about creating a sense of urgency and inevitability, making people believe that there's no other option but to comply with the proposed solutions.
And if you dare to question the narrative, you're labeled a denier or a conspiracy theorist, effectively silencing any dissent or critical thinking.
It's a classic propaganda technique, and it's incredibly effective. But fear isn't the only tool in the propagandist's arsenal, right?
Right.
They also use techniques like glittering generalities, where they use vague, emotionally appealing terms like equity, sustainability, and progress without defining what those terms actually mean.
It's all about creating a positive emotional association without providing any concrete details or evidence.
Exactly. And then there's name-calling, where they demonize their opponents and anyone who questions their agenda. It's a way to shut down debate and discourage people from thinking critically.
So it's a combination of fear, emotional manipulation, and character assassination. It's a pretty toxic brew.
It is, and unfortunately, it's becoming increasingly pervasive in our society. But there's another tactic that's even more insidious, and that's something called nudging.
Nudging, what's that?
Nudging is a form of behavioral manipulation that aims to influence people's choices without them even realizing it.
Okay.
It's based on the idea that people are irrational and easily swayed by subtle cues and suggestions.
So it's like subliminal advertising for our everyday lives.
In a way, yes. For example, grocery stores might place healthy foods at eye level to encourage people to make healthier choices. Or governments might automatically enroll people in retirement savings plans, assuming that most people are too lazy or indifferent to do it themselves.
It sounds harmless enough, but it's still a form of manipulation, isn't it? Who gets to decide what the, right choices are?
That's the key question. In a technocracy, those decisions are made by experts based on data and algorithms.
Right.
And the scary thing is that nudging can be used to influence our choices on everything from what we eat to who we vote for.
It's like we're being subtly steered toward predetermined outcomes without even realizing it.
Precisely. And the more data that's collected on us, the more sophisticated these nudging techniques become. It's all about creating a world where our behavior is predictable and controllable.
Okay, so we've talked about the tactics being used to advance these agendas. But what can we do to resist these trends? Is there any hope for preserving our freedom and autonomy in the face of such, powerful forces?
There's always hope, but it requires vigilance, critical thinking, and a willingness to speak out against injustice. First and foremost, we need to be aware of these tactics and how they're being used to, manipulate us. Once we understand the game, we're less likely to fall for it.
Right. Awareness is the first step. And we need to be willing to question authority, challenge narratives that don't make sense.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to ask questions, do your own research, and form your own conclusions. Don't just blindly accept what you're told by the media, politicians, or, so-called experts.
And we need to be careful about the data we share online and the technologies we embrace. It's about being mindful of the potential risks and unintended consequences.
Absolutely. And most importantly, we need to stand up for our values and our rights. We need to resist the erosion of freedom and autonomy, and we need to fight for a future where technology serves humanity, not the other way around.
Well said. It's a call to action for all of us. We can't just sit back and let these trends unfold without, pushing back. The future of our society and our humanity is at stake.
And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into technocracy and transhumanism. It's been a wild ride, but I hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. And remember, the most important thing is to keep asking questions, keep challenging assumptions, and keep fighting for a future that aligns with your values.
Absolutely. And if you found this deep dive valuable, be sure to share it with your friends and family. The more people who are aware of these issues, the better. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time for another in-depth exploration of the ideas and forces shaping our world. Until then, stay curious, stay critical, and stay engaged.